Good day everyone, this is Marjoy Pingki Yonson of AM3. So for today's video, we're going to talk about linguistics as a window to understanding. So lend me your ears because this is quite hard. So without further ado, let's get started. Linguistics as a window to understanding by Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is a professor of psychology at Harvard University. He is not a linguist, but he is a cognitive scientist. He is not so much interested as language as an object in its own right, but as a window to the human mind, window to understanding. Let us define first what is language. Language is one of the most fundamental topics in the human sciences. According to Steve Pinker, its trait most conspicuously distinct human from other species. It means language is distinctive. It is clearly differentiate humans from other species. It is also essential to human cooperation because we accomplish amazing things by sharing our knowledge or coordinating our actions by means of words. Possess profound scientific mysteries such as how did language evolve in this particular species? How does the brain compute language? But language has many practical applications, not surprisingly given how central it is to human life. Language comes so naturally to us that we're apt to forget what a strange and miraculous gift it is. Did you know that Steven Pinker studied language for 35 years? Yet he still fills him with wonder about the miracle of language and its vast expressive power. And it is the prime phenomenon that science of language aims to explain. Linguistic, the science of language. Not surprisingly, language is central to human life. Have you ever heard the biblical story of the Tower of Babel? The story about the Tower of Babel reminds us that humans accomplish great things because they can exchange information about their knowledge and intentions via the medium of language. Moreover, language is not a peculiarity of one group or particular culture, but it has been present in every community that anthropologists have ever studied. Little do you know that there's about 6,000 spoken languages on Earth. All of them are complex. Steven Pinker mentioned Charles Darwin, wherein he wrote, "Man has an instinctive tendency to speak as we see in the babble of our young children, while no child has an instinctive tendency to bake, brew, or write." Language is an intricate talent, and it's not surprising that the science of language should be a complex discipline. It includes the study of how language itself works, including grammar, the assembly of words, phrases, and sentences, phonology, the study of sounds, semantics, the study of meaning, and the pragmatics, the study of the use of language in a conversation. Scientists interested in language also study how it is processed in real time, a field called psycholinguistics. Third, how is it acquired by children, the study of language acquisition. And lastly, and how it is computed in the brain, the discipline called neurolinguistics. What is language? Now, it is important not to confuse language with three other things that are closely related to language. One of them is written language. Unlike spoken language, which is found in all human cultures throughout history, writing was invented a very small number of times in human history. About 5,000 years ago, Charles Darwin pointed out that children have no instinctive tendency to write, but have to learn it through construction and schooling. Again, language is not a written language. Second thing not to confuse language with is proper grammar. Linguists distinguish between descriptive grammar and prescriptive grammar. Descriptive grammar are the rules that characterizes how people to speak, while prescriptive grammar rules that characterizes how people ought to speak if they are writing careful written prose. Now, a third thing not to confuse language with is thought. Many people report that they think in language, but commune of psychologists have shown that are many kinds of thought that don't actually take place in the form of sentences. What sticks in memory is far more abstract than the actual sentences. Something that we can call meaning or content or semantics. In fact, when even comes to understanding a sentence, the actual words are the tip of vast iceberg of a very rapid unconscious non-linguistic processing that's necessary even to make sense of the language itself. Then, language is not a thought, but a way of expressing a thought. If language is thinking, then where do it came from? Finally, if language were really thought, it could raise the question of where language would come from if it were incapable of thinking without language. After all, English language was not designed by some committee of Martians who came down to Earth and gave it to us. Rather, language is a grassroots phenomenon. It's the original wiki, which aggregates the contributions of hundreds of thousands of people who invent jargon and slang and new constructions. Some of them get accumulated into the language as people seek out new ways of expressing their thoughts. And that's how we get a language in the first place. Now, language is not a thought, but can it affect the thought? This is not to deny the fact that the language can affect thought, and linguistics has long been interested in what has sometimes been called the linguistic relativity hypothesis or the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now, what is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? Sapir-Whorf hypothesis are language systemically influence or somehow influence how one perceives and conceptualizes the world. Now that we have set aside what language is not, let's turn to what language is, beginning with the question of how language works. How language works? In a nutshell, you can divide language into three topics. There are words that are basic components. Number one, the sentence that are stored in part of long-term memory that we can call mental lexicon or the mental dictionary. Second, there are rules that are recipes or algorithms that we use to assemble bits of language into more complex stretches of language, including syntax. Syntax are the rules that allow us to assemble words into phrases and sentences. Morphology are rules that allow us to assemble bits of words like prefixes and suffixes into complex words. Third, phonology, the rules that allow us to combine vowels and consonants into the smallest words. Number three, all of this knowledge of language has to connect to the world through interface that allow us to understand language coming from others to produce language that others can understand as the language interfaces. Words. The basic principle of words was identified by the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure, called the attention of arbitrariness of the sign or the symbol, wherein it has to be stored in memory in some format, in a very simplified form, and an entry in the mental lexicon looks something like this. There is a symbol for the word itself, there is some kind of a specification of its sound, and there's some kind of a specification of its meaning. One fact about mental lexicon is how capacious it is. Rules. The modern study of grammar is inseparable to the contributions of one linguist, the famous scholar Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is the one who set the agenda for the field of linguistics for the last 60 years. Chomsky's contributions to the science of language are the following. First, it focuses on the creativity or productivity. Second, languages have syntax and related to meaning. Third, syntax doesn't consist of linear associations. Let's go first with focus on creativity or productivity. It means it is the ability to produce and understand new sentences. For that reason, Chomsky has insisted that the linguistics is a properly branch of psychology and as a window into human mind. Second contribution or the second insight is that languages have a syntax. which can't be identified with their meaning. The third insight is that syntax doesn't consist of a string of word-by-word association, as in stimulus-response theories in psychology, where produce a word is a response which you then hear, and it becomes a stimulus to producing the next word, and so on. Let's talk about the essence of language. It's a phrase structure rules. Rules allows for open-ended creativity. Second, the rules allow for the expression of unfamiliar meaning. Third, the production of vast numbers of combinations. Rules allow for open-ended creativity. It helps explain that the main phenomenon that we want to explain, mainly the open-ended creativity of language. Second, it allows us to express unfamiliar meanings. The beauty of grammar is that it allows us to convey news by assembling into familiar words in brand new combinations. Third, also, it's because of the way phrase structure rules work. They produce a vast number of possible combinations. Phrase structure not only can account for our ability to produce so many sentences, but it's also necessary for us to understand what they mean. Another important contribution of Chomsky to the science of language is that the focus on the language acquisitions by children. Now, children can't memorize sentences because knowledge of language isn't just one long list of memorized sentences, but somehow they must distill out or abstract out the rules that goes into assembling sentences based on what they hear coming out of their parents' mouths when they were little. Children create sentences unheard from adults. Children are hardwired with universal grammar. So again, kids use language rules and generalizations from the moment they begin to speak. Children create original sentences. So far, we've been talking about knowledge of language, the rules that go into defining what are possible consequences of language. But those sequences have to get into the brain during speech comprehension, and they have to get out during speech production. And that takes us to the topic of language interfaces. Language interfaces. Having more sound options makes language more efficient by giving range to a variety of possibilities, alternating resonant cavities for moving the tongue back and forth, and up and down. Up and down. What about the flow of the information in other direction that is from the world into the brain? The process of speech comprehension. Let's talk about speech comprehension. Comprehension turns out to be an extraordinary complex computational process because we are generally unaware of how unambiguous language is. In context, we effortlessly and unconsciously derive the intended meaning of a sentence, but a poor computer, not equipped with all our common sense and human abilities and just going by the words and rules, is often awestruck by all different possibilities. So, better to take a sentence that is simple. So, moving on to pragmatics. So why do people understand language so much better than computers? What is the knowledge that we have that has been so hard to program in our machines? Pragmatics is how people understand language in context using their knowledge of the world. In short, pragmatics is how people use context and other information in order to understand language. So, the most important principle of pragmatics is called the cooperative principles. Namely, they assume that your conversational partner is working with you to try to get our meaning across truthfully and clearly. In short, cooperative principle are the people working together to advance conversation. Pragmatics, like our knowledge of syntax and phonology, involves many intricate computations. I would like to use the example that Sir Steven Pinker used in his video about the Get Smart comedy situation. For example, in the Get Smart comedy situation, which had a robot named Jaime, and a recurring joke in the series would be that Maxwell Smart would say to Jaime, "Jaime, can you give me a hand?" And then Jaime, the robot, would go break, remove his hand and pass it over to Maxwell Smart. Not understanding that give me a hand in context means help me rather than literally transfer the hand over to him. This shows how we bring to bear on language understanding a vast trove of knowledge about human behavior, human interactions, and human relationships. We can also use that background knowledge even to solve mechanical problems like who does a pronoun like he refers to. Because our knowledge of human behavior and relationship is required to understand what is being said. It's that knowledge that's extraordinarily difficult to say, the least to program in a computer. Moving on, the miracle of language. Language is a miracle of the natural world because it allows us to exchange an unlimited number of ideas using a finite set of mental tools. Those mental tools comprise a large lexicon of memorized words and powerful mental grammar that can combine them. Language thought of in this way should not be confused with writing, with the prescriptive rules of proper grammar, or style, or with thought itself. Language thought of this way should not be confused with writing, with the prescriptive rules of proper grammar or style, and even with the thought itself. Again, language is not written language, proper grammar, and thought. Why study linguistics? The study of language has many practical applications, including computers that understand and speak the diagnosis and treatment of language disorders, the teaching of reading, writing, and foreign languages, the interacting of the language of law, politics, and literature. Take note that linguistics is necessary for programming computers, treating language disabilities, teaching foreign languages, and understanding law politics. For Steven Pinker, language is really at the center of the number of different concerns of thought, social relationships of human biology, human evolution that all speak to what's the special about the human species. Language is the most distinctively human talent. Language is a window into human nature, and most significantly, the vast expressive power of language is one of the wonders of the natural world. I hope you learned something. Thank you for listening. This is me again, Mara Joy, Pingki, Yonson. Okay. Shalom, shalom, shalom. God bless.